Another way of thinking about schools as sites of rural development is through the cultivation of rural educators. And in fact, I would refer you again to the Journal of Research in Rural Education, and there's a very nice article on this just recently published by Mary Beth Mattingly and colleagues from the Carsey Institute out of University of New Hampshire. Since rural schools represent a primary source of employment in rural areas, they can provide obvious career options for rural youth who'd like to remain in their home communities. But rural schools often have difficulty in recruiting and retaining teachers and administrators, and the smallest and poorest rural schools tend to have larger shares of inexperienced teachers. Some positions are especially difficult to fill in rural areas, including instructional positions in math, science, and special ed. For these reasons, many rural schools have tried to address teacher recruitment using grow-your-own strategies involving efforts to identify and recruit local residents interested in becoming qualified to teach in area schools. This might also include programs aimed at high school students who may be considering the teaching profession. Grow-your-own strategies make sense since teachers typically want to teach in schools like the ones they attended and live in communities similar to and or near where they grew up. So a fruitful strategy for grow your own efforts involves partnerships with area community colleges and universities. And a number of these programs exist, although they receive, again, little attention. And they vary in the extent to which they explicitly focus on rural instructional preparation. Also, very little research has been conducted to better understand the potential best models and practices of these programs. So greater political motivation, I suspect, will be needed at state, regional, and national levels to support such programs, highlight their need and utility, and counter the perception of lower status of educating within rural contexts. Increasing access and use value of higher education for rural America. So while rural students overall compare very favorably with their peers in town and urban places in terms of high school achievement and completion, the same is not the case with regards to post-secondary education. The aim of increasing rural college going is fully consistent, I think, with rural economic development, as increased opportunities in rural areas will very likely increase student motivation for college attendance, as well as the attraction and retention of skilled and educated people in rural areas. Relatively strong secondary school outcomes among rural youth should suggest stronger rates of college going, but there are a number of factors that work to depress college attendance and post-secondary attainment among rural students. These include cost barriers, physical distance from colleges and universities, weaker precedents for college going within rural areas. Success within rural economies in the past did not necessarily depend on a college degree. And of course, also we have to mention the skyrocketing costs of college education now. And I would argue the public underinvestment in higher ed. So strategies to increase post-secondary attainment in rural areas should involve not only increasing access to higher education, but also offering opportunities that make sense for rural students. So these kinds of opportunities might include better community college access, which might be perceived as more practical and more relevant to local career opportunities, as well as less expensive and logistically complex than relocation and enrollment within a residential college program. Community college enrollment can also act as an effective stepping stone to further post-secondary education. Further, historically, the establishment and state support of rural community colleges has found to be strongly associated with employment growth in rural areas. Institutions of higher education may well overlook rural youth because they do not perceive a big market of college-aspiring youth in rural areas, and many colleges are still unaware of the need. However, some programs do exist that attempt to increase higher education access for rural students, but they are relatively few in numbers, and there are few systematic evaluations of their effectiveness. So programs like these deserve further attention.